Listen up. This is history in the making. And it's not necessarily good history today. Unless you are a independent diehard fan towards wanting to see Trump leave office. To me, my personal feelings is that it's a sad day. It is not a good day. Anytime a government, a free, open, fair democracy such as we have, has to fall upon to the guidelines of our forefathers, the builders, the framers, that designed the system to where it is a safeguard system. Anytime that we have to use this in the eyes of the general public, under whatever statute, it is not a good thing. But keep in mind, whenever our genius forefathers created this great nation, they put in place certain criterias that, just in case, if all else fails, we can abide by the rules of the law in regard to having a United States president removed. Now, just because they're doing what they're doing today don't necessarily mean that Donald Trump will be removed. But they're bringing the facts out before the people publicly so that the people can basically shame this president that we have today by the name of Donald Trump, our chief and commander. Shame him out of office to the extent that he basically walks out voluntarily. That is the dignified thing to do once you realize that you have gotten caught in red-handed, caught with your hand in the cookie jar, more or less, and you have this much adversity and this much animosity against you. The proper, polite thing to do would be to walk. Now, whether or not we're going to see that out of Donald Trump, towards him voluntarily giving up his position that he holds pertaining to his seat or not, will be a $64,000 question. And whether or not this actually takes hold to the point of impeaching this president, because there's so many hoops and hurdles that it has to go through before they can actually lower the boom down on him and say, enough is enough, you need to leave. Legally, and do it legally. Not just spewed out a bunch of stuff verbally, but legally. So let's watch the beginning phases of a historical moment that is actually sad, similar to the Nixon impeachments. Simply because of greed, simply because of unprofessionalism, simply because of a United States president that obviously didn't want to play by all the rules and regulations in regard to him being in the position that he's now presently in. So let's listen to this, please.
Preceded and followed that call. That work has necessarily occurred behind closed doors because we've had the task of finding the facts ourselves without the benefit of the investigation that the Justice Department declined to undertake. Despite attempts to obstruct, we have interviewed numerous witnesses. We have provided important testimony about the efforts to secure political favors from Ukraine, who have provided important testimony about the efforts to secure political favors from Ukraine. We have reviewed text messages among key players which show how securing political investigations was placed at the forefront of our foreign policy towards Ukraine. This resolution sets the stage for the next phase of our investigation, one in which the American people will have the opportunity to hear from the witnesses firsthand. We will continue to conduct this inquiry with the seriousness of purpose that our task deserves, because it is our duty and because no one is above the law. Madam Speaker, I urge passage of the resolution, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Oklahoma.
I do want to say one thing. I want to weigh in on one other thing. The very thing that Mr. Donald Trump was criticizing pertaining to the whistleblower who caught wind of an inappropriate conversation with a leader of the Ukrainian government is the very thing that Donald Trump relied upon towards a whistleblower, an informant, a snitch, a narc, whatever word, whatever terminology that you want to use. He relied solely upon to one of the Kurds over in Syria who had fingered Baghdadi, Big Baghdadi over there, one of the most rootless terrorist organizations pertaining to him being the founder of that terrorist organization. It was a whistleblower that basically gave the United States government a green light towards doing what we done towards destroying Big Baghdadi, the founder of ISIS, the founder of one of the most evilest organizations that's ever been organized, other than maybe Hitler, pertaining to that historical moment that happened just as of last week. I wanted to bring that out to my viewers that without the special hand of somebody that was willing to go out of his way and put his life and his family in harm's way towards revealing to the American officials where this rootless dictator was, we would not have ever have ended his rootless reign that he has brought upon to not only the American government, but upon many different governments all over the planet. So the very thing that Donald Trump has been criticizing is the very thing that helped him to achieve that particular task. So let's listen to the rest of this. This is going to be extremely interesting, and I'm sure this will be part one because it will fall into different parts. It will be fairly lengthy. So let's listen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield.
We have been listening to the beginning of this debate today on the first ever House floor vote on a resolution to provide for rules for the potential impeachment of the sitting president, Donald J. Trump. That was Adam Schiff there making a brief but forceful case. We're going to keep an eye and bring you into the room there on the House floor as soon and whenever we see significant action. But I want to bring back our panel. I was speaking with Hallie Jackson from the White House, who nimbly stepped aside as we went.
We're going to go forward. We're going to cut through the... Now we're going to go here.
Hey, and they're saying it publicly, too. We believe... All right, let me toss it back to you. I see Speaker Pelosi on the floor.
Yeah, Speaker Pelosi on the floor. Let's listen in.
Tranquility. Provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity, to ordain and establish this Constitution of the United States. It goes on immediately to establish Article 1, the legislative branch, Article 2, the executive branch, Article 3, the judiciary. The genius of the Constitution, a separation of powers, 3 co-equal branches of government to be a check and balance on each other. And it's to that we take the oath of office. We gather here on that opening day with our families gathered round to proudly raise our hand to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States. And that is exactly what we are doing today. Sadly, this is not any cause for any glee or comfort. This is something that is very solemn, that is something prayerful, and that we had to gather so much information to take us to this next step. Again, this is a solemn occasion. Nobody, I doubt anybody in this place or anybody that you know comes to Congress to take the oath of office, comes to Congress to impeach the President of the United States, unless his actions are jeopardizing our honoring our oath of office.
I heard an interview last night with somebody associated with this body that was making reference to this particular day today, what they're doing right now. It was a female. I don't forget her name. But she was associated with all this. She said that it literally makes chill bumps come up onto her arms and up onto her body. To think of the severity of what they're going to be embarking upon today pertaining to voting the way that they're going to vote. And whenever you have somebody in that mindset that understands the gravity, that understands the reality of what is going on here, that speaks volumes about the seriousness of all of this. This needs to be studied and I almost used the word admired. It needs to be studied and analyzed from communist-controlled countries, because they should set up bodies similar to the American body pertaining to the way that we function and the way that we do things. This is called a free, fair, open democracy. We do not live under fear to the extent of having to worry about the military coming in and busting down our door and basically assassinating us simply because we speak out against various high-ranking officials. This prevents this proceeding that you're watching here prevents from a dictator coming into our government and dominating and dictating to our lives, similar towards how either a communist controlled country or a banana republic would be functioning under the pretense of. We do not function, or we're not supposed to function, as a communist controlled country. We are not supposed to function as a banana republic, a crooked republic. The republic that we have is set up so that there are checks and balances, just as the Speaker of the House is talking about right here. Let's go back to her initial statements and let's listen up.
So I'm grateful to our committee chairs for all of the careful and thoughtful investigation they have been doing as this inquiry has proceeded. And today, the House takes the next step forward as we establish the procedures for open hearings conducted by the House Intelligence Committee so that the public can see the facts for themselves. This resolution ensures transparency, advancing public disclosure of deposition transcripts and outlining the procedures for the transfer of evidence to the Judiciary Committee to use in its proceedings. It enables effective public hearings, setting out procedures for the questioning of witnesses and continuing the precedent of giving the minority the same rights in questioning witnesses as the majority, which has been true at every step of this inquiry, despite what you might hear fulminating there. It provides the president and his counsel opportunities to participate, including presenting his case, submitting requests for testimony, attending hearings, raising objections to testimony given, cross-examining witnesses, and more. And contrary to what you may have heard today, we give more opportunity to his case than was given to other presidents before. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, for making that point so clearly. And these actions, this process, these open hearings, seeking the truth and making it available to the American people, will inform Congress on the very difficult decisions we will have to make in the future as to whether to impeach the president. That decision has not been made. That's what the inquiry will investigate, and then we can make the decision based on the truth. I don't know why the Republicans are afraid of the truth. Every member should support allowing the American people to hear the facts for themselves. That is really what this vote is about. It's about the truth. And what is at stake? What is at stake in all of this is nothing less than our democracy. I proudly stand next to the flag, and I thank the gentleman from New York for providing it for us. This flag, so many have fought and died for this flag, which stands for our democracy. When Benjamin Franklin came out of Independence Hall, you've heard this over and over, on September 17th, 1787, the day our Constitution was adopted, he came out of Independence Hall and people said to him, Dr. Franklin, what do we have, a monarchy or a republic? And he said, as you know, he said, a republic, if we can keep it. If we can keep it. And this Constitution is the blueprint for our republic,
yes,
and not a monarchy.
Yes.
But when we have a president who says, Article 2 says I can do whatever I want, that is in defiance of the separation of powers. That's not what our Constitution says. So what is at stake is our democracy. What are we fighting for? Defending our democracy,
right,
for the people. You know that in the early days of our revolution, Thomas Paine said, the times have found us. The times found our founders to declare independence from a monarchy, to fight a war of independence, win, to write our founding documents, and thank God they made them amendable so that we can always be expanding freedom. And the genius, again, the genius of that Constitution was the separation of powers. Any usurping of that power is a violation of our oath of office. So proudly, we all raised our hand to protect and defend and support the Constitution of the United States. That's what this vote is about today. And we think the times found our founders, the times have found others in the course of our history to protect our democracy, to keep our country united. The times have found each and every one of us in this room and in our country to pay attention to how we protect and defend the Constitution of the United States, honoring the vision of our founders who declared independence from a monarch and established a country contrary to that principle, honoring the men and women in uniform who fight for our flag and for our freedom and for our democracy, and honoring the aspirations of our children so that no president, whoever he or she may be in the future, could decide that Article 2 says they can do whatever they want. Again, let us honor our oath of office. Let us defend our democracy. Let us have a good vote today and have clarity as to how we proceed, why we proceed, and again, doing so in a way that honors the Constitution. We must honor the Constitution in how we do this. We must respect the institution we serve. And we must heed the further words of our founders, e pluribus unum from any one. They didn't know how many be or how different we would be, but they knew that we needed to always be unifying. So hopefully as we go forward with this, with a clarity of purpose, a clarity of procedure, a clarity of fact, a clarity of truth. It's about the truth, it's about the Constitution. We will do so in a way that brings people together, that is healing rather than dividing, and that is how we will honor our oath of office. I urge an aye vote and yield back the balance of my time. Chair Lady yields back.
We have been listening to Speaker Nancy Pelosi on the House floor, speaking for the first time ahead of this floor vote, creating the rules and the blueprint for the potential impeachment of President Donald Trump. And the Speaker, who we hear from often, spoke there in grander terms, quoting Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Paine, the founders, and saying it brings her no joy to do what the House is now on the precipice of doing. A historic day, certainly in the view of the woman in charge, Nancy Pelosi. I want to turn to our panel for the special coverage. We're going to hear from the very first time, because we've been hearing some other comments from the House floor and from our reporting. Senator Claire McCaskill, Gene Robinson, and Barrett Berger with me here in our headquarters. What type of speaker did we just observe? She's a former colleague of yours. It does seem like a different day to her.
Well, this is really strategic, and I would disagree a little bit with the opinions that say this is because of the pressure the Republicans put on the Democrats about process. I don't think that's what this is at all. I think this is very smart people in the House of Representatives realizing they now have the evidentiary witnesses that are credible, that are not partisan, that can get in front of the camera and explain to the American people just how serious this is. I think this is about taking the facts to the American people. We've seen support for impeachment growing marginally. The country's about 50-50 now. I think Nancy Pelosi and Adam Schiff, who we got to remember is a prosecutor, and a real prosecutor, by the way, one that was actually in the courtroom, not one who just, shuffled paper. He actually now has heard these witnesses, by the way, with Republicans in the room. He now knows he has factual witnesses that will be very powerful to the American people. And I think that's what this is about. Yeah. Moving it into a public process where the people of America can take a look and go, holy cow. These folks who really care about our country are tremendously worried about what this president has undertaken.
Well, you mentioned Congressman Schiff, who we also saw speak on the floor noticeably right before Speaker Pelosi, is a former prosecutor. He's also presented impeachment cases to the Senate before.
He
presented to your committee, Congressman Schiff, in that role as House manager for the impeachment of a federal judge.
He was the lead prosecutor in the impeachment of a federal judge out of New Orleans, and I was the judge. We had the majority in the Senate then. My co-judge was Orrin Hatch, and I knew from opening statement that this guy had been in the courtroom. And as an aside, Ari, and for Barrett, you have no idea how fun it was to rule on hearsay objections. To finally get to rule on a hearsay objection. But in all seriousness, he did a remarkable job in that trial. He was very competent, and I think he sees this as a prosecutor that he now has the evidence that he can take to the jury, which is the American people, in a very public way.
And Gene, put this in the context of Washington. It's not an insult to the House floor that we're watching to observe that many days what is discussed there has no wider impact. Today, what is discussed is this resolution, which everyone agrees, if it passes, has huge impact.
It does have huge impact because it sets us on a process that the nation has only gone down this road 4 times, right? In its entire history. I was able to sit down with Speaker Pelosi on Monday. I heard a sort of pre-version of the speech she just gave. But Senator McCaskill is absolutely right in terms of what her view of what's happening right now. She does not. She is convinced that the House does not need to have this vote, and in fact, she rejects any suggestion that this is because of pressure from Republicans in the House. And I think she's sincere on that. I think it is all about public sentiment. She often quotes Abraham Lincoln as having said, and I will paraphrase because I don't get it exactly right, but public sentiment is everything. Without it, with it, you can do anything. Without it, you can do nothing. And she does believe that based on the witness testimony they've had so far, that it is time to present these facts to the American people because they are so stunning. The fact record here is so stunning. Not just the transcript of the phone call that President Trump had with the Ukrainian president, but the entire context of this sort of rogue parallel foreign policy that was not in the interest of the United States, but was in the interest of Donald Trump's political fortunes and in the interest of smearing a former vice president who may be his opponent in the next presidential election. And they think they're ready. They think they're ready to make the case.
Yeah, and that's very interesting. Your reporting of speaking with the Speaker Pelosi, who's very strategic about how she sets things up. Barrett Berger, who's a former federal prosecutor, has mentioned watching the House floor right now, we are seeing a debate over basically two things. One, is there enough evidence to go this far? You don't just begin an impeachment against any president. Most presidents never get to the point we're even at this morning. And two, if you are going to do it, how do you set up rules that are fair, which is a highly debatable thing? Your view of what we're seeing on the floor right now.
Well, as many people have explained, this part of the process is most similar in the criminal system to the part of a grand jury, which, as we all know, happens in secret, but that doesn't mean that there aren't rules and procedures for how that works. So I think right now what they're doing is sort of shedding sunlight for the American public on how things have worked in the past and how it's going to be going forward when we actually get to see what's going on. I think what's going to be most useful for this next stage when we're actually bringing this to the public is the order of how we've learned about the events and how the public has been made aware of these things is not the same chronological order as they actually happened. Things have come out in sort of drips and drabs. We learned about the whistleblower complaint, but then we ultimately learned much had happened before that. I think the most important part about this next phase will be to present a more compelling narrative for the public. In sort of the order that they see, they can see how each of these witnesses plays into the bigger story, the role that they've played. And while some of that has come out, I don't know that we've been able to see it in sort of a more comprehensive manner. And that's the important of this next stage.
I want to turn to another one of our Washington experts, NBC correspondent Heidi Przybyla, who has been working her sources all week through this news cycle and heading into this morning. And Heidi, what are you hearing from your sources, and who are the Republicans to watch as Pelosi drives this out to the floor that puts pressure on those who have to decide where they stand?
Right, Ari. I am in touch with a number of my House leadership sources who are on and off of that floor this morning. And what we are witnessing here is a Democratic Party that is really closing ranks around their leader and around this process. Even some of the most endangered Democrats are expected to vote for this, spare a few. The real question in their minds at this moment is whether they will get any Republican support for this. I can tell you from my sources that the members that they are watching who may be most likely to break, although they have no idea at this moment if it will actually happen, are those retiring Republicans. Republicans like Justin Amash of Michigan, like Will Hurd of Texas. Those are the guys, Francis Rooney, for example, of Florida. Those are the guys that they are watching. They do not expect any Republicans who expect to come back and set foot on that floor in the new Congress to vote for this. And that's for a number of reasons, Ari. They may actually get more support, they think, for an actual impeachment vote than this for a number of reasons. Number one, a lot of those Republicans haven't seen any of the evidence that's been laid out in these closed hearings, and their main argument really has been process. And in my meetings over the past couple of weeks, Ari, with some of these moderate Republicans, even they have been griping about these process arguments. Their votes are not needed for this to succeed and for this inquiry to go forward, and they know that very well. But why are the Democrats so comfortable with having this as a party line vote, which it may very well be? Because according to their own internal polling, which we obtained about a week ago, Ari, even in some of the most competitive battleground districts, and states, there is a lot of support, majority support, for holding this inquiry. There is not majority support at this moment for an actual impeachment vote, but there is majority support for going forward with this process, and that is why you see the Speaker and other Democrats stressing the need to have this inquiry and to have it in a very transparent way, and comparing this to previous inquiries and how those were run out of the House.
Fascinating. Heidi Prisbilla, reporting from Washington. Thank you, and we'll be coming back to you. I want to tell viewers what we're looking at, because if you've seen sort of the split screen Washington moment, it is all happening live. We see on the House floor the different visual aids brought by different members of the Congress. We've seen them go back and forth, making the case for and against moving forward on the impeachment probe. On the other side of your screen, you see Speaker Pelosi. Your eyes do not deceive you. That is also live. She spoke on the House floor and then went directly to her lectern to brief reporters. She's going to finish this briefing. There will later be a press briefing by members of the key committees on the Democratic side as well. And all of that bundled together with the dramatic House floor vote on this resolution to provide for the rules for the potential impeachment of President Trump. So it is, by all accounts, a busy morning on Capitol Hill. And I say that without even getting to the next piece of news from the Washington Post and bringing in Bob Costa, who we rely on for so many of these breaking stories. Bob, your colleagues have another one that would be the headline right now, if not for this drama. I'm going to read from the Washington Post. White House official expected to confirm diplomat's account that Trump appeared to seek quid pro quo. Not a headline the White House likes, obviously, and it suggests, again, more corroboration, Bob, of people going into these private depositions, that parallel track happening in addition to this floor vote right now. Tell us about that story, which you and your colleagues have been reporting out, as well as the other depositions.
When Ambassador Taylor stepped forward recently, he made his point to Congress that he believed there was a quid pro quo that was explicit in private deliberations inside the administration. Now it's being underscored not only by Lieutenant Colonel Vindman, but you have Mr. Morrison coming from the National Security Council to tell Congress that what Ambassador Taylor said in his explosive testimony is accurate. And so that's a data point for House Democrats and House Republicans to digest as they move forward with this process. And what you're watching on this House floor is also a test for House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy. It's not just a moment for Speaker Pelosi. McCarthy's being closely watched by this White House. Will he keep Republicans in line? Moderate Republicans from the Philadelphia suburbs and elsewhere. Retiring House Republicans, which are mounting by the numbers because they're so wary about their chances in 2020. A test for the GOP as the Senate Republicans look on and wonder, what are the political stakes? What's the political standing for the party?
Bob, stay with me. We're going to dip in. We've heard from the Speaker and the leader of the Intelligence Committee. Now we see the leader of the Judiciary Committee, which would ultimately handle any potential impeachment. Let's listen into Congressman Nadler.
Struggle with Russia, investigate his or her political adversaries. I support this resolution because no person, Republican or Democrat, should be permitted to jeopardize America's security and reputation for self-serving political purposes. I support this resolution because if after a fair and thorough inquiry, the allegations against President Trump are found to be true, they would represent a profound offense against the Constitution and the people of this country. I support this resolution because I believe it is the duty of this House to vindicate the Constitution and to make it crystal clear to future presidents that such conduct, if proven, is an affront to the great public trust placed in him or her. I support this resolution not because I want the allegations to be true, they sadden me deeply, but because if they are true, the Constitution demands that we take action. I support this resolution because it lays the groundwork for open hearings. The House and the American public must see all of the evidence for themselves. I support this resolution because I know we must overcome this difficult moment for the nation. This resolution is necessary to ensure that our constitutional order remains intact for future generations. I support this resolution because we have no choice. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
We have been listening to House Judiciary Chairman Jerry Nadler speaking in support of this coordinated effort to pass a resolution providing for rules to the potential impeachment of the sitting president. Those rules, we can tell you, and we've been studying them here in our newsroom, what these rules do is basically make the Intelligence Committee the clearinghouse for all factual allegations against the president, and then make the Judiciary Committee the final arbiter of whether and how to impeach. Do you impeach on one article or several? So the person we just heard from there, Chairman Nadler, will have a major seat at the table if this proceeds. Speaker Pelosi is also briefing, and I'm told that she is speaking about different topics in her press conference, so we're not going to go back to that unless she makes more news, but that press conference is ongoing. We're keeping an eye on everything for you. I want to bring back in Bob Costa and ask you about the other bombshell we haven't had time to get to yet, which is reporting about the alleged cover-up and how this very, very significant piece of evidence, this transcript, was handled. What can you tell us about that?
Mr. Eisenberg and others within the national security apparatus are under real scrutiny about how they handled these transcripts coming in from President Trump's calls with President Zelensky and other foreign leaders about why the White House is sequestering them away inside of the West Wing and what has been omitted from the memos and other documents that have been released to Congress and the public. And you can expect Mr. Morrison and so many others officials who are planning to testify in the coming weeks to be asked about not just what was on those transcripts and what could be on them, but the conduct and the possible behavior of those within this West Wing and how they put it all away.
Bob, thank you as always for your reporting. I can tell you here, our experts are on set with us in the headquarters. We're looking at Chairman Eliot Engel from Foreign Affairs, also touches on this inquiry. I want to bring in historian John Meacham to this conversation. I'm told, among other details that distinguish this morning from most other mornings on Capitol Hill, the Speaker intends to preside directly over this vote in her constitutional role of authority running the House, but she, of course, doesn't usually physically, literally do that. Your view of those kind of details and what we're seeing in the eyes of history this morning.
Right. Well, that's exactly what the Democrats are trying to do, is frame this as a historical moment where we determine the future course. The word crisis, which we overuse, actually was popularized by Hippocrates. It was a medical term. It was about the moment in a disease where the patient either lived or died. And what the Speaker's doing is saying this is a moment where our democracy lives or dies. She quoted Thomas Paine earlier. Another thing that Paine said was, tyranny like hell is not easily conquered. And I think one of the things that people need in that of the popular folks who need to make up their mind about whether they want to support this or not out in the country is, do we want a president who builds walls at the border but won't build a wall around our elections? It's a question of national sovereignty in many ways. And my own sense is, for all of our nuanced conversations, for looking at the constitutional niceties here, I suspect that this is going to come down to President Trump's defiance versus Nancy Pelosi's vision of democracy. I think what we saw Mulvaney say the other day about get over it is going to be the president's position. Just guessing here, but it's based on now 4 years of watching him. I think he's going to say, yeah, we did it. I did this. I was trying to find dirt on somebody, and there was dirt to find. What are you going to do about it? And so the question about truth that the Speaker was talking about is going to be, which truth do we value more? A bombastic president who is largely lawless, or a system that served us so well for almost 2.5 centuries? That's going to be the existential question going forward.
Fascinating. John, stay with me. I want to turn to Jeremy Bash, who has held the unique position that is so in demand for expertise right now at the intersection of law, what is allowed, and national security and foreign policy, what is the interest of the United States, a role you've played at the Pentagon and the CIA, broadening beyond the details of the resolution which we've been covering. I'm curious your view of the larger stakes, because today is an inflection point of the Congress moving towards a public position that something was deeply wrong and dangerous about the president's Ukraine plot, as alleged.
Yeah, and I've sat on the House floor, Ari, for many debates about House resolutions, but none quite like this. In some ways, important ways, this vote today is really a dry run for impeachment. It's a way to test the cohesion of the Democratic caucus and put Republicans on notice that they're going to have to ultimately defend the substance of the president's conduct. And they're not going to be able to just take refuge in process claims that they're not getting equal time, or they're not being able to call witnesses. This resolution is going to lay bare that the process is going to be fair, it's going to be equal, it's going to be open and transparent. And at the end of the day, the Republicans are going to be faced with a very simple question: is, are you okay with a president of the United States asking a foreign leader to get involved in a U.S. election? Yes or no? That's going to be the question presented. And I think in the last couple of days, our Democrats are feeling more confident because they've seen the way Republicans in the White House have vilified Lieutenant Colonel Vindman, a combat wounded war veteran, a currently serving Army officer who was the Ukraine expert on the National Security Council, who explained why he was so disturbed by the president's conduct and why he went to the White House Council. And it follows on other efforts by Republicans to vilify people like Ambassador Bill Taylor himself, member of the 101st Airborne, served in combat in Vietnam, devoted his life to public service, serving Republicans and Democrats, and he too was highly disturbed by the president's conduct.
Jeremy, you raised some important points I want to get into, and I mentioned you of course have the experience as counsel. I want to bring in another of counsel here at MSNBC, Professor Melissa Murray from NYU Law, former clerk for Judge Sotomayor at the time. And I'd like both of you to weigh in on what Jeremy raises, which is the question of fairness. This is a constitutional process. This is the only time that the Constitution imagines treating the president as a potential defendant. These rules that the House could pass today, first to the professor and then back to Jeremy, basically say we are going to treat the president with a lot of fairness and options, including, Melissa, the right to send his lawyers down and lodge objections and ask questions in the ensuing process. Break that down for us.
So the Constitution doesn't provide for the actual rules of the impeachment inquiry, and there are really not a lot of precedents to follow here, just the two presidential inquiries we've had in the past, Andrew Johnson and Bill Clinton. And so the procedures that the House have outlined in the resolutions are pretty standard based on what we saw in the Clinton impeachment. So the president will have certain due process rights, but not full due process rights. So again, this is sort of in keeping with the idea that this part of the inquiry is really akin to a kind of grand jury investigation where there are limited rights for criminal defendants. And so there will be some rights, but there will also be opportunities for the House Democrats to check the president's ability to stonewall on such issues like subpoenas. So even as the White House can call its own witnesses or subpoena certain witnesses, they cannot have free rein if they don't cooperate with the process itself. And I think that's an important check on what has been a really obstructionist process on the part of the White House.
Jeremy?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, if you look at the resolution that we're analyzing, what it says is that Republicans will have the right to equal time. They'll be able to question the witnesses for the same amount of time as the Democrats in the majority. They'll have the right to subpoena witnesses and gain concurrence of the chairman, the Democrats, for those subpoenas. They'll have the right to subpoena documents and other evidence for the inquiry. And then at the end of that phase one, where they're gathering the evidence in public, then the Congress will refer this to the Judiciary Committee, again, for impeachment consideration. So it's a very carefully laid out, elaborate, fair, transparent process that at the end of this, and I suspect this will sort of all come to a head probably by the end of November, early December, we'll have several articles of impeachment for the full House to consider.
Senator McCaskill, your view on all of that, given something we touched on earlier in the hour, which is you're one of the few people in the country who's actually sat in the Senate and heard from members of Congress, managers of an impeachment. It was, of course, not for President Trump, but for a federal judge, but that process.
Yeah, I think the important thing to remember here is that this is not the trial. This is a preliminary step. It is going to be public hearings. And like the private meetings, the Republicans are going to be in the room. They're going to be able to ask questions. Big difference, though, is the rule that is in this resolution allowing the chairman and the ranking member to give 45 minutes of time
to the
in blocks
staff counsel.
to staff counsel.
Well, let me have you walk through this, Senator. We're going to put up on the screen, actually, because we're getting right into the heart of what this resolution does. And your party, the Democrats, have pointed out in the details, they're affording the president, through the House process, potential protections and rights, here you see, that go beyond even some of the past processes, including, for example, and we mentioned this, that he can send his lawyers, he could send Rudy, he could send Jay Sekulow in to ask questions during the House process.
And by the way, that's much different than a grand jury because we don't let defendants' lawyers in the grand jury room to listen and or ask questions. So there is an added layer of due process for the president in this. But what I'm really interested in is the fact that they figured out doing 5-minute increments for people questioning fact witnesses is very difficult for the public to follow. If you get 45 minutes, a skilled courtroom lawyer with 45 minutes to question a witness, you're going to be able to lay out the narrative of facts that is so important to this consideration. And by the way, the cross-examination for 45 minutes. The people will be able to see, is this cross-examination phony? Are they really, do they have a point here? Or are they just ginning up political partisan BS like they mostly have been doing so far within the confines of these public hearings? So I do think it's going to be interesting. I think that the 45-minute increments will allow people to understand more of what's going on. And by the way, this is Devin Nunes. This is not, Tom Cole. This is Devin Nunes, one of the most ardent pro-Trump members of the House that is going to be the ranking member that's going to get 45 minutes a shot to try to take out these witnesses. I wish him luck because I have a feeling these witnesses are going to be incredible.
The senator raises this, and I want to bring it to our prosecutors here because many lawyers have observed. I think we're going to actually jump in and listen to we'll come back to this. I see Republican leader McCarthy on the floor. Let's listen in.
Or are we gathered to debate the critical national security issues regarding China or Iran? Well, that answer would be unanimously no. We are not working for the American people. Those items would resemble the achievements of a productive Congress, a Congress that truly works for the people. But you know what this Congress counts? This Congress records is more subpoenas than laws. That's the legacy. It is not just devoid of solutions for the American people. It is now abusing its power to discredit democracy. By using secret interviews and selective leaks to portray the president's legitimate actions as an impeachable offense. Democrats are continuing their permanent campaign to undermine his legitimacy. For the last 3 years, they have predetermined the president's guilt. They have never accepted the voters' choice to make him president. So for 37 days and counting, they have run an unprecedented, undemocratic, and unfair investigation. This resolution today only makes it worse. I've heard members on the other side say they promise rights to the president, but only if he does what they want. That's the equivalent of saying in the First Amendment, you have the right to the freedom of speech, but you can only say the words I agree with. That's what you call due process. The amendment offered by my colleague, Mr. Cole, would help correct some of the transparency concerns we have witnessed over the last few weeks. But today is more than the fairness of an impeachment process. It is about the integrity of our electoral process. Democrats are trying to impeach the president because they are scared they cannot defeat him at the ballot box. That's not my words. That's the words of my colleagues from the other side of the aisle that has offered impeachment 3 different times. This impeachment is not only an attempt to undo the last election, it is an attempt to influence the next one as well. This is not what Democrats promised when they entered the majority 11 months ago. In this chamber, we heard from our speaker while we all sat here. We heard what the speaker said when she talked about words of optimism and cooperation. It was said we would work together to make America stronger, more secure, and more prosperous. We were told our mission was to return the power to the people. In fact, our new colleagues on the other side of the aisle were sent to Washington with a mandate to do just that. So what's happening? Nothing like that today. Not long ago, Democrats recognized that a partisan impeachment would put politics over people and harm our nation. That exact same speaker that talked about cooperation, that talked about and promised the American people that they would be different. They would be different if you trusted you with the majority. You have failed in that promise. That speaker said impeachment is so divisive to the country that unless there's something so compelling and overwhelming and bipartisan, the word of bipartisan, I do not think we should go down that path because it divides the country. What has changed since those words have been spoken? Alexander Hamilton wrote, "There will always be the greatest danger that the decision to use the impeachment power would be driven by partisan animosity instead of real demonstrations of innocence or guilt." This sham impeachment by Democrats have proven Hamilton right and portrays the speaker's own words. I know emotions are high. I know members would even run for positions of chair simply on the fact that they would be a better chair for impeachment right after the election. But when we all stood that day and listened to the words of the Speaker of cooperation, we all raised our hand to uphold the Constitution. Tomorrow is November 1st. We're 1 year away from an election. Not just for this House, but for the highest office of presidency. Why do you not trust the people? Why do you not allow the people to have a voice? Why, in a process that America lends their voice to all of us, that you deny us to speak for them? Is animosity risen that high? Is Hamilton proven correct again? There is a moment and time that you should rise to the occasion. This is that moment. This is the moment that history will write. History will ask you when you cast this vote, when you cast a vote to justify something that has gone on behind closed doors, I want you to ask the historian and answer the question, what do you know that happened there? Have you read anything that took place that you just justified? What do you believe the definition of due process is? What do you think the First Amendment is? Do you have the right to have a voice, or only the words that you agree with? You may get elected in a primary, but in a general election, you're elected to represent the people of America, not to deny their voice. This House is so much better than what is transforming today. I believe everyone who runs for this office runs to solve a problem. But when you go back to the American public with the achievement of more subpoenas than laws, that is not why you ran. That is not why we are here. And that's why I agree with my colleague, Mr. Cole, that believes in the power of the people, people before politics, that we believe and know we can do better, that we believe the Speaker when she said about cooperation. We believed her when she said if you trusted them with the majority, they would be different. I guess it's only fitting you take this vote on Halloween. I yield back.
Now,
I want to stop it right there in his comments, weigh in on what he's trying to do. First of all, it's we the people who are standing up against this type of unprofessionalism and aggression that the president continues to keep demonstrating again and again and again right in front of our very eyes. And I'm just going to use this, I'm going to go back to the same example that I used a while ago about the whistleblower, about the person that was basically an informant working over in Syria that gave out the information in regards to capturing and destroying Baghdadi, one of the most ruthless dictators in the country, or on the planet. It was Mr. President this past Sunday morning. Today is Thursday, October the 31st, as the man just got through mentioning, pertaining to it being Halloween 2019. But as of 5 days ago, let me get my arithmetic right, it was the President of the United States of America, that's the President of the free world, that stood on national TV Sunday morning, almost giving an address to the people towards telling the particulars of how the operation went in destroying this individual. He got permission from this country. He got permission from the Russians. He got permission from this nationality. He got permission from all these different people. That's not how the American government runs. Believe it or not, there is information that is considered classified that we, the people, really don't understand the fundamental dynamics of, because of these type of situations. But yet now we got a president that wants to degrade the Democrats about being whistleblowers, and he himself gets on national TV and literally makes our intel, the CIA, and other international involvements pertaining to the intel community cringe. Cringe because he says stuff that's not proper for a president to expose to the world. Plus, he compliments Putin and other dictators like the leader over in North Korea, like they're his pals, like they're his best friends. These are the very people that we have tried to bring transparency of, going back to the era of Ronald Reagan, whenever Ronald Reagan told Gorbachev, which was after Brezhnev, that it was an evil empire towards how that it was dominating and dictating to its people, to tear that wall down. The very wall that Ronald Reagan, pertaining to our open, fair, free democracy, is the very wall that now Donald Trump wants to build. He wants to bring division to our allies. He wants to build a wall separating us from the rest of the world. Just like him using the Ukrainian diplomatic, fair, elected president, telling him, pro quo, we will allow for you to have these precious commodities and assets, but I have something that you need to do for me. Which once more is based around feeding his own pockets, because he's got interest over in that area. If the people cannot see through what is going on as far as being hidden in open sight, if the people cannot see this, it's simply because they either don't want to see it or they don't care to see it. And I got news for you people. Once the American flag, once Old Glory lowers to the ground and is replaced with some other alliance. Alliance that we don't want. Alliance that we don't have a desire to want to become dominant here in the United States of America. Once Old Glory falls to that extent, then is whenever a democracy such as ours will fall to its face, just like the American flag. And I'm going to go as far as boasting not being a supporter of the gun advocate movement, but actually being more of a supporter in the anti-gun advocate movement. But I'm going to go as far to say that something like this, what we're looking at right now, would had probably already had occurred and could have possibly, I say could, hypothetically speaking, could have possibly merged towards the dictatorship of such of a leader if the American people didn't have the right to bear arms. And that may be the very reason why today that we have not been subject to an all out and out war, an all out and out invasion, either coming from China or Russia or some of the other communist controlled countries, is because of that. That and the fact that we do have nuclear armament that they probably have already done read through the lines and realizing that once we become so depleted as a nation, we'll basically bring the doomsday scenario into the planet to the point that if we fall, the rest of them fall too. What you're hearing and what you're being exposed to is some very, very important stuff. This is actually more important than the election, in which I myself have questions about the authenticity of whether or not the election was fair and open. Just like I investigated, not stalked, but investigated, while I was down in Florida in different counties and different regions, and spoke to on-hands law enforcement agencies, people that work for these agencies, and found out that the hanging chads and how that various ballot boxes wound up in the bottom of a swamp somewhere and never got counted because the Republicans was trying to steal the election. And guess what, folks? They actually did. They actually stole the election from Al Gore. Al Gore bowed out gracefully and didn't put up a fight, even though he probably had the support and the backing from the Democratic Party. In doing so, he bowed out gracefully towards not wanting to bring that much more separation to we the people. And I think probably one of the main reasons why Al Gore done that is because the state of Tennessee in and of itself did not hold Al Gore up towards electing him as being the next United States president. And the reason why, I think, I can't prove it, but malicious lies was spread during that procedure in the campaigning to the point that the Republican parties was going around convincing everybody in the state of Tennessee at the time that if the Democrats become in power, they're going to go door to door taking everybody's weaponry away from them. You know, those that are not familiar with Tennessee and the other southern states, basically the original 13 colonies, they really don't understand how deeply ingrained that our roots are whenever it comes to standing up for a Confederacy type democracy in the regard of having guns. I know people that's got as many as 10, 12, 15 guns just laying around in their shops, pole barns, a gun within hand distance of a tractor, under a tractor seat, or in a toolbox on a tractor or a combine. I've worked around people that put snub-nosed Saturday night specials in their hard hats just in case there was some sort of idiot that wanted to start something out on a construction site. I've worked with people and know people that's got as much as over $1 million worth of guns underneath their basement within arms throwing distance almost from where I live right now here in Weakley County. Very common for people to have 10, 20, 25, $30,000 worth of guns. Very common. Spread throughout the land. Spread throughout the whole United States. Some of them, once more, within arm's throwing distance of where I live, has as much as $250,000 worth of guns. I'm talking less than 10 miles away in any direction. I can go to people's homes and find all types of artillery. Whenever you tell the people in the South that if the Democrats become in power, they're going to confiscate their guns, you will see people's eyebrows rise, and you will see people basically turning red in the face towards saying, no, 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 that is not going to occur. That is not going to occur under my watch or in my lifespan. These people are willing to die with a gun in their hand before you literally take it. I'm talking about law-abiding citizens. I'm not talking about the gangs. I'm not talking about the rootless people. I'm not talking about those that are associated with crime or underground dark movements pertaining to mobsters. I'm talking about people that go to church every Sunday when the doors is open, that if you try to convince them that you're going to come in there and take their guns, you will literally have a war on your hands. So once I figured out and found out by working down in Florida and doing my own pre-selected investigation, similar towards what I done out in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, and similar towards what I done down in Mount Carmel, pretty close to Waco, Texas. Once I identified that this was not a scam, this actually occurred down in Florida where ballot boxes did not get counted, and the election was basically stolen by the Republicans. I knew then, at that particular point in time, which would have been in 2007, basically a little over 10 years, basically like 13 years ago, because we're fixing to walk into 2020. But I knew then the illegitimacies of how a free, open, fair election was and is supposed to be. Now, granted, in your banana Republican areas down in Honduras, South America, Cuba, Africa, and other parts of the country, these things is almost to be expected by having this type of corruption. But by having this type of corruption in America in the 21st century, is not supposed to happen, especially whenever at one time we was the smartest, we was the most hungoest people towards being very vibrant, towards wanting to work and dominate the world with our commercial goods and the smokestack industry days. We was top in agriculture, we was top in manufacturing cars, we was top in medicine, we was top in education, we was top. And to see somebody come into the existence of our free, fair, open democracy and see them try to pull the wool over the American eyes to the extent of bringing hardship to we the people is absolutely mind-blowing to me, that I'm sitting here in my own little RV here in West Tennessee watching this unfold right in front of my very eyes, knowing of all the cameras, the recorders, the internet, the social media, and knowing the rules of engagement, and still seeing somebody like Donald Trump try to do something so unethical to the value of our democracy. It literally makes me cringe, just like it makes secret intel communications cringe just about every time the man opens up his mouth, because you don't know what he's going to say, how he's going to say it. You don't know if he's going to be pulling to the far right or pulling to the far left. He, as Hillary Clinton has said, in which I'm sure she's biased because she was running against Donald Trump, but whenever you make a statement that you have an illegitimate president, that is a very, very big statement that an individual is making. A matter of fact, Sunday, I made a call to Homeland Security up here in Nashville, Tennessee, complimenting our military towards what that they had achieved. But I never, not one time, complimented the President of the United States. And the reason why that I didn't compliment him in that operation towards bringing Baghdadi down was because I didn't think he deserved it. I didn't think, though he was the president, and I'm not trying to bring stain to the seat of the presidency in our government, but because of the things that he has said, the way that he has said them, how he goes about doing things, criticizing people, making people mad. It's like this guy's a walking, talking, freaking time bomb. He's a loose cannon. And I can understand, because of the things that has occurred in his presidency, the reason why that we're seeing what we're seeing right now coming down the pike, in questioning his authenticity of his capability of running a government, a free, open, fair democracy. Our republic was built so that these occurrences would not take place in somebody trying to bring hardship into our government. And the very person that got voted in office, supposedly, I don't know for sure if it was tainted the same way that the election was tainted pertaining whenever Al Gore was running against the Bushes. But to see these things occurring right in front of your very eyes towards the officials in this country acting in such of a immoral, unethical way absolutely brings tears. It brings tears and sorrow into my life, and I'm sure many others, that this has now floated up the surface to the point of what we're seeing on the floor pertaining to a vote. If there's ever been a time that we, as not only American citizens, but Christians, needed to pray for not only our leaders in our nation, in our country, but needed to pray for other leaders throughout the whole world for the healing of the nations, it is today. And once more, don't get me wrong, I'm not an advocate for guns and gun violence. And I will never be an advocate for violence, because the teachings that Christ taught us was to be wise as serpents, but harmless as doves. But of course, an individual, and I'm now going to use me as an example, was put on the spot by me moving back to Northwest Tennessee in the past 4.5, now going on 5 years, towards people deliberately provoking again and again and again, stopping out here on the road, cussing, carrying on, sabotaging our property and bringing destruction as far as tearing up stuff, and all the chatter that went on amongst the internet, different platforms pertaining to this piece of property down here and who was living on this piece of property. I was literally under attack to the point that one year, the first year, I put out a sign, SOS. Whoever drove by could see it. SOS, help, help, help. And then I put out another sign, the last time, pertaining to not going to be bullied in a free, open, fair society. The authorities in this county has idly sat by and been a part of this type of atrocities that has happened right here on this corner. And various witnesses that has gotten a hold of some of my material, either by CD or on Facebook or on YouTube, is very aware of the complications that I run into since I come back here in 2014. And you talk about a pile-on. Oh my God. There was people coming out of the woods from every direction that wanted to finish off Ode Juby, the individual that's talking to you right now. And the reason why that they wanted to finish off Ode Juby, because they knew that if they could finish off the founder of the Windmill Ministries, then the Windmill Ministries would be dead before it ever got off the ground good. In other words, they was steadily wanting to shoot me out of the saddle pertaining to the opening of the White Horse, the first horseman, before I ever got out of the gate good. And the authorities in this area sat idly by and laughed and sniggered and was entertained by all this adversity that was falling my way. And the thing about it is, I'm not running for mayor. I'm not running for a senator seat. I'm not running for even a dog catcher that people have to vote on, the way that I understand. The seat that I hold is the seat that sits beside the Heavenly Father. For they asked Jesus, Jesus, can we drink of the same wine that you drinketh from once we enter into the kingdom? And Jesus said, yes, you may. And another asked Jesus, Jesus, can we sit in the same seat that you sat in? And Jesus said, yes, you may. Then another spoke up and said, well, can we sit on the other side of the Heavenly Father, pertaining to there being two seats? one on the right, one on the left. And Christ spoke up and said, "Ye know not what you ask, for it is not mine to give." I know for a fact that my life has been spared, not just for me to survive and continue to eat, breathe, air, and talk, but my purpose for God the Father sparing my life is to bring forth this particular moment and this particular season that I'm sitting here doing what I'm doing right now, talking about all this. There's various people throughout this area that would have loved to have seen the destruction of the Windmill Ministries missions towards it not fulfilling its purpose, because they themselves have never had a true relationship with the Heavenly Father. And I'm talking about not just the heathen, not just the lost or the ungodly, but I'm talking about church members that can read the King James Version Bible and translate it and interpret it correctly. But they sit idly by, put their hands under their hips, sniggering and laughing and giggling during the time that my brother and I was basically fighting for our very lives, fighting for our independence towards holding our ground. And that's basically what we're seeing right now with this impeachment trial. And it's not that it's some sort of personal vendetta against Donald Trump. But what it is a group of people that needs to be commended of the Democrats, believe it or not, that has raised a red flag in these unethical, unprofessional moments that Donald Trump has brought to this floor. Not for a personal grievance, but for the survival of this nation, of this great country that we call America, that people all over the world has sought to come here because of our Constitution, because of our freedoms. They have risked life and limb, some of them, not counting how many people has sacrificed the ultimate sacrifice towards making sure that that American flag called Old Glory remained up the top of that pole. That's what's at stake here, friends. That's what's at stake here. And as far as I'm concerned, Donald Trump brought this upon to himself in his unprofessional, unethical behavior, just like him getting on national TV Sunday morning and spewing off to the world, "Oh, we got permission from this country, this group, that group." He went down a long list thanking how many people that had been associated with that operation towards bringing down Baghdadi, which now opens up a brand new venue in the eyes of certain people that are smart enough to look through this and say, okay, how come that wasn't done 10 years ago? We realize that Baghdadi was being protected and he was slick. I mean, I've heard cases to where whenever someone was going to talk to him, they would actually blindfold him and take him to this location, then keep the blindfold on them, then take them to another location, then keep the blindfold on them, never take the blindfold off, and then take them to another location, and they would basically body scan that person to make sure that they didn't have no type of listening devices, no type of documentation devices pertaining to telephones or recorders before anybody was even allowed to even get close to Baghdadi. Kind of like Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein never slept in the same bed twice in a row. A lot of people don't know that. But whenever you're this cruel to your own people, You have to steadily be on the watch towards whenever you do sleep. You sleep with one eye open and one eye shut, and you basically never are at peace with yourself. I'm pretty sure that rootless dictator who recently got blowed into smithereens was probably one of the most miserablest people or persons on the planet. Let's listen to a little bit more of this, and once more, this will be part one of this particular impeachment White House in crisis. And it is in crisis. You have a constitutional crisis. You have a crisis with the leadership of one of the greatest nations in the world. That if we don't watch, instead of Donald Trump resurrecting this country, he's going to finish us off. And I'm sure that's the way a lot of people, once these proceedings come out into the eyes of the general public towards the do's and the don'ts, towards what he said and how he said it and what his intent was pertaining to his hidden agendas, I'm pretty sure that the majority of the American people will see the same thing. You have somebody that is speaking out of both sides of his mouth. You talk about somebody that's being a hypocrite by accusing everybody else of being a whistleblower or being a leaker, and he himself gets on national TV and leaks out information that the intel community never expected or intended to be brought into the eyes of the world. It goes beyond just being a loose cannon to the point of just plain Jane grown negligence. Gross negligence. It may be intentional negligence towards wanting to bring this country down a path of destruction again. Because once a country ever becomes so displacent to the point that they have to enact martial law, civil disturbances, then there won't be no election. The president that is already in power will remain in power unless somebody creates a coup and takes him out that way. And which hope to God that won't occur again like it did with JFK towards the assassination of a president. But if this country rose up in arms like other countries have in the past and like we did years ago, about, well, since 1860 was whenever the Civil War started, that once that occurs, then there won't be an election. And the people that's in power now will remain in power until things settle down. Once more, that's entrenched into our laws that a lot of people don't even know is there. So what this guy has just got through saying, as far as I am concerned, he has manipulated the truth by saying some of the stuff that he is saying in defense of Donald Trump. And once all this finally gets out into the eyes of the general public, then there will be a vote towards either keeping him or saying, in his own words, "You're fired," will occur. And it's done not out of animosity, but it will be done in the name of our democracy.
We believed her when she said if you trusted them with the majority, they would be different. I guess it's only fitting you take this vote on Halloween. I yield back.
Ma'am,
Minority Leader McCarthy on the Republican side, giving his rebuttal to several Democrats. You may notice he went a little longer than several of the chairs. McCarthy and Pelosi have what are called magic minutes, as we've been reporting, so they can go longer under the rules. He spoke about what he views as the politicization of the impeachment process by Democrats, accusing some of running to be chairs strictly for the planned impeachment of President Trump. And he finished, as I bring in Senator McCaskill, he finished with a Halloween flourish.
Yeah. They really, I kind of feel sorry for these guys in a way. I mean, what have they got? I mean, it was process first. Well, now there's going to be a very open process. It's going to be, frankly, giving the president more due process than previous impeachment proceedings. Then they said, well, hearsay, and now that's gone. We have first-person accounts. Then they tried to say, well, it's a leftist conspiracy. Oh, yeah, right. A lieutenant colonel, decorated veteran in the Army who carries shrapnel in his body from Iraq. Oh, yeah, that guy is doing the left-wing bidding. I mean, they really have tried to keep finding something to avoid defending the president based on the facts. And McCarthy today is doing the same thing. He's trying to find some way to distract from the facts that are so powerful. We know that the president tried to use a foreign government for his own political purposes. That's impeachable. And they can't really get their arms around that. So they're going to continue to try to distract and defend on any basis they can. And, if it wasn't so lame, I could really work up some sympathy for him.
Well,
I tried to hold back.
I really, tell us what you really think, Claire. I just wanted to point out one thing, which is that we're going to talk about the political context because we have to, right? Because that's the way it works, and we're going to talk about Democrats and Republicans and how many and this and that and the other. But we really ought to step back occasionally and look at that shot of the House floor and realize, this is our government. This is the Constitution. This is the House of Representatives that is voting on how to potentially take action against the President of the United States. And history will record what the House voted today, what the Speaker of the House said, how the House leads this inquiry. And ultimately, if it does lead to impeachment, how the Senate decides this president's fate. And it's so there's the political, but there's also the real. There's also the constitutional. Keep that in mind.
Well, let me say a little bit about the constitutional part, because I thought what was really interesting is that we have Representative McCarthy laying out all of the talking points that we're going to see over and over again. Why are we doing this now? This is just a way to get around an election, and we have an election coming. Why don't we just let the political process play itself out without recognizing that in the political process, if it has been tainted by foreign intervention, the people will not be heard. And so I think the one thing that Democrats have to press on this is that this is not a process for the president. It is not a process for Congress. This is a process for the people. And the people have been stymied in other parts of the political process. And this was created by the founders to allow them another avenue to have their voices heard.
Right. Eagle-eyed viewers will note when you look at the screen here, we've just had the gaveling of the end of this first part of debate, and we're moving towards, as reported, this series of votes. The first vote will be a bit of a congressional throat clearing. It will not be the vote on the actual impeachment resolution, but within minutes after that, we expect them, if it's the order of due course, to turn to this event, Barrett, which is the vote on the actual rules for the potential impeachment.
This is our fundamental way towards diversifying what should be diversified in the way towards bringing open and fairness to this body. And this is what our ancestors, our forefathers, this is why they put certain criterias in place so that it would keep everything in check. They're already talking about Donald Trump is already scheming towards wanting to shut down the government. Shut down the government. And this will make, I think, either the third or the fourth time that he has embarked upon trying to shut down the government. Because he knows that if he can use this as a strategy technique in bringing distractions, that maybe it would delay this process to the point that maybe he won't have to worry about walking away from his particular seat as being the President of the United States. Donald Trump has said some really, really off-the-wall things. And at first, I was actually a supporter of Donald Trump. I actually backed him up. And whenever he would make a boo-boo by saying stuff that was so crazy, I think myself and people like me would try to exercise the excuse by saying, well, he's not a professional politician. He really don't know the P's and Q's. But whenever you've been in power, now going on 3 years, if I'm not mistaken, he should have already learned the P's and Q's. But whenever you have somebody that's in this type of position that refuses to take good sound advice from his advisors, then you got a loose cannon. Then you got where we are right now towards discussing whether or not they want to keep this guy on board or they're going to tell him to hit the road, Jack, and don't come back. Basically, the exact same thing that they done to Mr. Nixon.
So this will be a little tricky back and forth because they're going to try to make this look like it's not fair. And they may do that by trying to subpoena witnesses that have no business in the hearing. I think that's a trick that they could try to pull. The other thing that's important here is that the chairman of the Judiciary Committee has the right to deny access or questioning by the president if they are not complying with legal subpoenas from Congress. So this is another conflict that we can predict, that there will be a back and forth about whether or not the president gets as much due process as these rules set out based on his willingness to provide information. Because so far, the president, only people who've testified have done so in defiance of the White House, not in cooperation with the White House. So it'll be interesting to see how those two things play out, because the Republicans are doing everything they can to try to make it look unfair.
But this is straight out of the playbook. I mean, this is just more tinkering and tweaking with procedure without ever getting to the substance of the underlying allegations. So this is just more of the same. Like, what's wrong with the procedure? There are so many procedural irregularities without ever getting to what the American people want to hear is like, did you actually pressure a foreign government to give you dirt on Joe Biden? That's what people want to know about.
Right. That's exactly what people want to know about.
And so once we hear publicly from a string of witnesses who say just that, basically, that happened. Oh yeah, it happened. I saw it. I heard it. Does the White House then begin to participate and actually defend itself on the substance, or what does it do? I mean, or is it just all bombast all the time?
Yeah, it'll be really
until we get to potentially an impeachment vote.
Right.
I want to delve deeper into that point and also tell our viewers here, as we're at the top of the 11 o'clock hour on the East Coast in Washington, you're watching MSNBC's special, live, uninterrupted coverage of what all agree is a historic day on Capitol Hill. This is the preparation for a House vote on Resolution 660, providing for the rules for the potential impeachment of the current president, Donald Trump. What you see on your screen is a countdown that will result in proceeding to that vote. So the current count you see on your screen has not yet arrived under the House procedure on the vote. What I can tell you is that in a matter of moments, when you see this count run down within the next 9 minutes, we expect the House to proceed then to the actual vote on the impeachment resolution and rules. We also are told that in a departure from the normal course, Speaker Pelosi will be presiding over this, speaking and going up in front of the entire Congress there to preside over this vote. Speakers also, as you may know from watching the news, speakers don't usually vote on each provision because the Speaker of the House controls everything and can control when there are votes and when there are revotes. But we're told the Speaker may also, we're watching to see if the Speaker votes on this resolution as well. I want to bring in Garrett Haake, who has been keeping an eye on all of this directly for us on the Hill. What happens next, Garrett?
All right, I'm still seeing the majority of members have not yet voted in this first series. Usually the first votes of the day are the first time a lot of these members set foot on the House floor. So folks are coming from their offices, from their apartments around town. A lot of members just starting their day rolling in for this first vote. So we will see this timer probably expire and then have some additional time before that second vote, the key vote of the day, takes place. I want to point back to Kevin McCarthy, the Republican leader in the House, who just finished his remarks. He made a couple of political points that I think you can expect to hear a lot more, particularly as the process changes here and the process arguments having been used by Republicans up to this point become less valid. The first is a sort of circular argument, but you'll hear it a lot, that this cannot go forward if it's not a bipartisan impeachment. He will be calling back to Nancy Pelosi's party line, essentially, for the last year and a half, that but impeachment has to be done on a bipartisan basis. Pelosi would talk about that a lot as a means to forestall impeachment on earlier issues brought forward in this administration. But Republicans, by whipping very aggressively to keep their membership in line, can prevent this from becoming bipartisan. And in fact, the only Republican who has come out in favor of impeachment thus far, Justin Amash of Michigan, is no longer a Republican. And the second point that I think we're going to hear from McCarthy over and over again here is the idea that this impeachment is designed to invalidate the last election. They don't want to talk about the idea that this is that what Democrats are investigating here is the idea that the president is trying to influence the election in 2020, but they want to try to turn off independent voters, independent-minded Americans who are just so tired of the Mueller, Russia, 2016 storyline. So anytime you hear Republicans refer back to the idea that an impeachment vote is an invalidation of the last election, that's what is being signaled here. If you start to discuss impeachment in the framework of here's the president trying to change the results of the 2020 election, you will get a different reaction from people than anything that reminds people of the long relitigation of the 2016 campaign. McCarthy laid down the marker there. Expect to hear those two lines of political spin here for the next month or so.
Garrett Hakes, we are 6 minutes out of this vote. Thank you. We'll be coming back to you. I want to turn back to Jeremy Bash. As you know, Jeremy, most members come down to the House floor, and that's where they make their votes known. But in a social media era with a Twitter presidency, we sometimes get other indications. And everyone knows that Justin Amash, who left the Republican Party over these issues, has really broken with the president already. But he has a new tweet that may give a sense of where he's headed today, and I want to read it to you. It's pretty striking. Brand new. His tweet says, quote, "This president will be in power for only a short time. Excusing his misbehavior will forever tarnish your name," he says. To my Republican colleagues, quote, "Step outside your media and social bubble. History will not look kindly on disingenuous, frivolous, and false defenses of this man." Jeremy.
Yeah, and Congressman Amash has been a leading voice outside of the Democratic caucus for holding the president accountable for this conduct. I don't know whether or not he's going to have other people join him. Right now, it looks like about half the Democrats and half the Republicans have voted, and right now it's breaking almost entirely on party lines, with the exception I see of one Democrat who's voted no on this initial resolution. And I think what you're going to see from here is, over the next 5 or 6 minutes, the rest of the House members will come to the floor. The bells are ringing around the Capitol to signify minutes ticking down on this vote. They will extend it to allow almost everybody to vote. They vote by an electronic key card that they slide into a slot there in the House well. And then you'll see Nancy Pelosi at the podium. She probably will get a number of inquiries from Republicans trying to sort of gum up the works, but she will ultimately gavel down the proceedings, call probably a 5-minute vote, and that will be the vote on this resolution, and that we expect also will largely break down upon party lines. In the next couple of weeks, Ari, I think you're going to see open hearings on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays in the month of November, and you're going to hear the familiar names, Vindman, you're going to hear Volker, you're going to hear Sondland, you're going to hear McKinley, you're going to hear Taylor and Fiona Hill. But beyond that, Ari, I don't think there's a lot more evidence beyond those that testimony, the text messages, and the July 25th phone call. Beyond that, there's not much more evidence to present. And then here, we're going to be back here watching the House floor probably around Thanksgiving or before the December holiday break.
And Jeremy, how do you view those depositions? As you mentioned, some of them have details leaking out. Mr. Bolton and others are still being summoned, and they're figuring that out. But this set of rules that if it passes today, brings all of those out into public view.
That's right. One of the provisions in this House resolution is that the chairman of the committee, Adam Schiff, can make public, essentially posting on a website, the depositions. This was done in previous inquiries, like in the Benghazi inquiry and others, where essentially you see a live transcript of those depositions. That's going to set a foundation for the hearings so that, in a sense, members know what to ask the witnesses. They know where to go. It's essentially a roadmap to the substance of their testimony. And I think once you see those depositions in public, you hear the testimony, you see the evidence, then I think, again, members are going to have basically everything they need to know whether or not they can impeach the President of the United States.
Jeremy, thank you. We'll be coming back to you. Gene Robinson, who's here as part of our special coverage at headquarters. We're just a couple moments away from moving through this procedural vote, and then we get to the big show.
Right.
What are you watching for, particularly when we see reporting out of the White House that the president has done something that he's loath to do, which is call Republicans and ask for help?
Right. We're looking to see if Republicans, if anybody strays, basically. I mean, Justin Amash, as you said, is no longer a Republican. We expect him to vote for impeachment. Do any of the retiring Republican members of the House, Will Hurd, for example, the others, there are, 20 or so who have announced they're retiring. Do any of them vote for the impeachment rules? That would be a shocking thing, I think, for the White House to see any Republicans, and I predict it would probably launch a tweet storm. But meanwhile, there's nothing on the president's agenda today, as I think Hallie pointed out. So presumably he's doing the same thing we're doing. He's sitting there watching, and he's going to watch that vote very carefully.
Yeah,
if there are any Republican defectors.
They're watching carefully, and of course, as there may be a few Republicans who stray, there are also potentially Democrats who stray or who the speaker doesn't feel are needed to actually get over the majority hurdle here, and who may be allowed to stray. I want to go to Kristen Welker, who has been keeping a keen eye on all of this, both from the White House and working your sources on the Hill. What are you hearing?
Well, Ari, we know that the White House thinks as many as 4 to 5 Democrats actually may flip, to your point there. So they'll be watching that very closely. We know President Trump has been working the phones. He started his day in the residence as of about a half hour or so.
We're going to go forward real quick, because I went back a long way just for this. So we ought to be able to see the final results of all this in just a few minutes.
Wrong.
Jury tampering, I think.
Is proverbially known in the Constitution as the big enchilada. I
see the Speaker of the House has already went to her seat. They're yik-yakking, talking, more talk.
Votes are in. Garrett, I want you to walk us through what you're hearing, and I'm going to bring in Heidi as well out of Washington. So to both of you, really teeing up the question, what will happen next when you look at the people who may leave their party in this key vote?
The yeas are 231.
Well, Ari, it looks like they're calling this first vote here, so we may stop when they start the second. This is the vote that we've been watching for all day, but I can tell you this will not be an exact party line vote. We know so far of 2 Democrats who our team now expects to cross over and vote with Republicans against this resolution. And they have very different profiles here. Jeff Van Drew, a freshman member from New Jersey, just elected as part of the Blue Wave, just told one of our colleagues down in the basement just now that he will vote against this resolution. I'm going to jump into
listening to the speaker.
Please say aye. Those opposed, say no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
Madam Speaker,
Resolution is adopted.
Madam Speaker, on that I would request the yeas and nays.
Yeas and nays are requested. listed. Those favoring the vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number have arisen. The yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote, colleagues. A 5-minute vote.
Garrett, we are proceeding to the key and critical.
All right, let's go. Get to the meat of the matter.
The House authority until this is, of course, final and gavelled. The Speaker doesn't usually, we see here, of course, in red at the top of the screen by the flag, the Speaker does not usually physically preside in this manner, but vote.
Members sticking around, the galleries were packed as we got towards the start of this vote, a lot of staff present. There was, again, that feeling that this was a momentous day.
On this vote, the yeas are...
Let's back up. Oh, right there.
On this vote, the yeas are 232. The nays are 196. The resolution is adopted without objection. The motion to reconsider is laid upon the table.
And you hear the gavel at 11:29 a.m.
Does the gentleman from Missouri seek recognition?
Request permission to speak for 1 minute out of.
Without any objection? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized. It is heard.
The United States House of Representatives, 11:29 a.m. on the East Coast, has passed this resolution providing for the rules for the impeachment of President Donald Trump. This is the first time the full House has held any floor vote whatsoever on impeachment. The party line vote provides a preview, and we hear this from both sides, of what is coming. Democrats completely united moving forward on impeachment in a way that they were not united even just within the past few months. Republicans united against. The balance of power in the House stands with Speaker Pelosi and the Democrats, and that is a preview of what could be in short order in the coming weeks, open public hearings and a vote on the actual impeachment of Donald Trump. We're going to keep an eye here on this House floor, but I want to bring in our panel that has been assembled precisely for this reason. Senator McCaskill, you've been walking us through how this works. We had the party line vote. On the substance, what does it mean right now, the Congress closer to impeaching Donald Trump?
Yeah, I think now that it's a timetable issue. How soon will the public hearings begin? I'm told by my friends on the Hill that they anticipate public hearings beginning the middle of November. I think they will probably, we already can kind of guess who the witness list is going to be. The witness list will be Trump appointees, like Ambassador Taylor, who was brought in to the State Department by Donald Trump. Lieutenant Colonel Vindman, who obviously is not somebody who is on anybody's fundraising list or is a political person in any way. Volker, Sondland, I think you'll see that list, and I think you'll begin to see those hearings beginning the beginning of November. I anticipate those hearings will complete by probably the middle of December, and it wouldn't surprise me if there are articles of impeachment that work their way towards the Senate before Santa gets here.
Yeah, you're talking about impeaching Donald Trump before Christmas. I want to bring back in Garrett Haake, who's been following all of this. Garrett, this is a turning point. It would appear now, with these new rules passed, that this United States Congress is closer to the impeachment of the sitting president than it has ever been since it was constituted after the midterms.
It's very hard to see how Democrats turn back from impeachment now. You just set the table for open hearings, first in the Intel Committee. These rules prescribe potentially open hearings after that in the Judiciary Committee. There's a lot of movement afoot. There's a ton of pressure on Democrats to wrap up this deposition stage, the closed-door process that they've been using thus far, and move this impeachment effort into the sunlight. And in fact, there were a number of Democrats who had been cautious about supporting the impeachment inquiry, or who had held off for a long time, who put their support of it in these exact terms today before this vote, saying they want to move this into the sunlight, that they are not exactly voting for the impeachment of the president or saying they think the evidence is strong enough to do so yet, but that it's time to move forward and to make this process public. So I suspect, and indeed, there's no reason to think otherwise, we're going to start seeing so much more of a public-facing effort here by Democrats. They have to take the evidence that has come out of those depositions, largely in the form of leaks and of releases by attorneys of opening statements, and turn that into a public argument. Nancy Pelosi has been very clear on this from day one. You cannot impeach the president without the public's support. And so while they may not be able to turn very many Republican members, they won't need them in the votes, but they need Republicans, independents, regular people across the country to get on board with them, and that starts now.
Thank you, Garrett. We're going to go now to the White House. Kristen Welker.
Well, Laurie, President Trump tweeting just moments ago, the greatest witch hunt in American history. This is how you can expect the president and his allies to frame what they have just witnessed on the House floor. We're also anticipating a White House statement at some point today. And just to reiterate a point, we know that the president's been working the phones. We expect he may actually meet with some Republican lawmakers a little bit later on today. But bottom line, they are going to continue to try to discredit this entire process. The president has already begun campaigning, trying to paint the Democrats as the do-nothing Democrats. We saw that they put out an ad last night during the World Series, in fact, to that effect. And it's underscored by that tweet that President Trump just put out. So what happens moving forward? Well, we know that there are a number of key witnesses that the White House is going to be focused on. Tim Morrison, obviously among those set to be on Capitol Hill today. He announced yesterday that he's going to be leaving the administration. He is the second White House official to be on Capitol Hill who heard that July 25th phone call between President Trump and the president of Ukraine. That's really at the heart of all of this. And then, of course, John Bolton has been called to testify. His lawyer making it clear he's not going to do so unless he's subpoenaed. But you can bet that the White House focused on that potential testimony as well. And again, with this vote, it essentially means that at some point, those testimonies will be able to take place in public view. So while the White House has been calling for that on the one hand, on the other hand, it could complicate the political calculation. So we're awaiting the official White House statement, but we have heard from President Trump, the greatest witch hunt, he calls it.
Thanks to Kristen Welker for that response. I want to bring back John Meacham, presidential historian. There are many days where we talk about it.
This is the beginning phases of trying to right a wrong.
History, but they're not historic days. This now officially, formally, would appear to be one. Particularly when you look at Donald Trump as an elected president facing now potential impeachment inside his first term, only the second elected president who would ever be impeached. What do you see as the historical significance of what Congress appears on the precipice of doing, having passed these rules moments ago?
Well, I suspect that the president will become only the third president to be impeached. Andrew Johnson, Bill Clinton, and I now suspect Donald Trump. Whether he's removed from office is an entirely different question. And in a way, the country itself is now on trial. The White House chief of staff, and I suspect strongly, I'd bet a lot of money, that the president will end up saying, yes, I did this. This is how I govern, and the Bidens were in the wrong. I was trying to find out about this. They're corrupt. What are you going to do about it? And that will be the question before the country is, do we in fact care that the president of the United States was attempted to violate the sovereignty of our national elections? And I think that's for all the nuances, for all the niceties, for all the procedural points that we'll spend a lot of time on, and we should, that is the fundamental question confronting the country, is in a 48-48 country with a few folks on the knife's edge in between these two tribes, what will we decide is acceptable behavior from the president of the United States? And in many ways, far more so than the Bill Clinton example, more like the Richard Nixon example, more like the Johnson example. It will tell us a great deal about who we actually are right now.
And what is the nature of these allegations, John, tell us about the unpredictable part of Washington? That 6 months ago, no one thought we would be here today. And we live in a world, and you and I have discussed this on some of these special coverage days before, we live in a world where things are treated as impossible and then obvious, with almost no processing in between, particularly with the hot takes in Washington and sometimes online. Many people said this isn't happening. The Mueller report.
Welcome to the 21st century. This is the first time that they have went down this avenue with this type of technology that now everybody has advanced to, as well as people over in other parts of the world. And because of it, it is creating irrational irregularities from what we are accustomed to towards what went on during the Nixon impeachment trials versus what we're doing today. We live in a society today to where the world has suddenly shrunk, just like me making my YouTube platform available to the general public. We live in a society today to where everything is instantaneously. To where 25, 30, 40 years ago, that was not available to the general public like it is today. That is what causes the irregularities of comparing to then versus now. We are now living in a completely different world in comparison towards what went on during the 70s. A completely different world. And that's one of the things that is actually so critical in having a president that represents his people, is that now he can just blurt out one thing that could cause chaos in thousands, if not millions, of people's lives. And I don't think a lot of times that he realizes that. But whenever you're talking on the big mic, I'm talking about the big mic that now other nationalities and leaders of other nations can hear. Whenever you're talking on the big mic, it can have profound effects upon we, the people. That's the difference between then versus now. Once more, welcome to the 21st century. We're now going where no man has gone before. Kind of like the Star Trek Logan. I don't know if it was a Logan or not, but they brought it out a lot of times whenever the initial Star Trek of all its episodes, going where no man has gone before. We are treading in waters that we have never treaded in before, towards being this transparent, this open before not just the American people, but the world. And because of it, it has increased the stakes. In other words, we need to be good stewards in our democracy. That way other countries will learn from that in which what we have done to develop their own free, fair democracy as far as their republic that they want to be a part of. Thanks again for listening, and I'm going to end this note by the ending part of this individual here on the right, letting him finish out what he wants to say, because he does have a lot of straight, good knowledge pertaining to the do's and the don'ts, the laws, and what is acceptable versus what isn't acceptable. So whenever this guy gets through speaking, good luck to all of us. and shalom from the Windmill Ministries here at 291 Thompson Road, Chiron, Tennessee, zip code 38255.
Whatever it did not close the circle, and we're getting into 2020, and the debates have begun, and the focus is on 2020. No, all of a sudden, facts, whistleblowers, evidence piles up, and the Congress suddenly gets to this point today, full House floor vote, these are the rules, these are the rights of the president, and it would appear, I say this as a reporter watching it from what we're learning, it would appear the House saying, Mr. President, get ready, you are about to be impeached.
You know, it's fascinating. It's a fundamental feature of history and reality that most of life is like an iceberg, right? We see part of it, but there's a huge amount we don't see. And often what happens is it is the province of history and biography to go back and find these stories that were below the surface. What's happening now in this sped up world is that we find it out far more quickly. We're on a kind of warp speed for revelations. And you're right. I mean, X number of weeks ago, Ukraine was not top of mind at all. And it shows us that, A, we have the single most self-avowedly unconventional president in American history. So he's knocked down many of the guardrails that have kept the republic going. And so they're flattened. And the question we now have to answer is, do we care about those guardrails?
Do we care? And how does the public assess something that today, out of the House, was a party line vote, but when the evidence piles up, might move other people one way or the other? I mean, if it's going to be a fair process, it's going to have to lead with evidence. John, stay with me. I want to whip back to the White House. Kristen Welker, on many days, the news comes from Donald Trump's impromptu press conferences, his availabilities, and his tweets. This is, as you've been reporting for us, a bigger day, a more formal day, and we now have, I'm told, a more formal, traditional written statement from the White House responding to this, not just a tweet. What are you hearing?
That's right. In addition to the tweet that President Trump just sent out calling this the greatest witch hunt in American history, we just got this statement from the White House. I'm going to read it to you since it is an official statement. The president has done nothing wrong, it says, and the Democrats know it. Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats' unhinged obsession with this illegitimate impeachment proceeding does not hurt President Trump. It hurts the American people. Instead of focusing on pressing issues that impact real families like reducing gun violence, passing the USMCA, improving health care, lowering prescription drug costs, securing our southern border, and modernizing our aging infrastructure, the Democrats are choosing every day to waste time on a sham impeachment, a blatantly partisan attempt to destroy the president. It does go on to take jabs at House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and more broadly Adam Schiff, and essentially concludes by saying the Democrats want to render a verdict without giving the administration a chance to mount a defense. That is unfair, unconstitutional, and fundamentally un-American. So that is the statement coming out of the White House at this hour. And again, Ari, just to underscore this point, it's a preview of the strategy that you are going to see moving forward. The president, this administration, the president's campaign are going to focus on all of those policy issues that you just heard in that statement. And the fact that there's unlikely to be action on any of those issues. He's going to try to campaign on it, and he's going to try to rally support today by working the phones and possibly holding meetings, Ari.
Kristen Welker at the White House with the new statement. Thank you. I want to tell everyone where we're at. The House has voted on these rules for the impeachment of President Donald Trump, party line vote. Speaker Pelosi has been seen leaving the House floor, and we're keeping an eye on whether we can get any more availability or reaction from her. She did say when walking by reporters that it is a sad day, and you can see some of that right there, walking by some of the Hill statues with our own reporter. Our special experts are here. We're also waiting, I should tell you, for the chairs of the relevant committees who have now been, under these rules, newly empowered, including intelligence and judiciary, to step to their lectern and say what they want to say about what comes next. So this is a busy and tumultuous day on the Hill. Turning to our expert, Senator McCaskill.
I'm going to leave it right there once more. Thanks again. I wasn't expecting for them to come out with that particular statement coming from the White House. Once more, you can see it for yourself. We have 231 yays and 194 nays pertaining to this being an official inquiry pertaining to impeaching the President of the United States, White House in crisis. This will be part 1. Shalom.